Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Conscious Conversion. Today, I have a beautiful woman as a guest, Alyssa Troob. We're meeting for the first time right now in front of your very eyes or before your very ears. And I already adore this woman. We already click quite a lot. Just already talking about all things deconditioning and sort of like how to unravel the layers of all of the programming that comes into our auras as we come into this world. So I'm really, really excited to have this conversation with you, Alyssa. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Sarah. It is an honor to be here. And likewise, so good to meet you. And audience, thank you for having me.
Mm. So you will talk about all the things, but you dabble and dive deeply into so many different modalities and so many different perspectives. And I'm really excited to learn more about all of those and to open that portal to get us into that deep, juicy conversation. Tell us in this moment, in this incarnation, right now on the planet, with all the wild things happening around us, what is your soul's purpose?
I love this. I love this question so much because I feel like it's ever changing, honestly. And, to be a little bit ironic, but also not really, because you just said it when you primed me and said, hey, I'm going to ask you, just so you know, what your life's purpose is. I went, oh, well, it's to be me. Like that
Yeah.
was initially, right, what popped right into my head. And so much of that is deconditioning. But what I think is really fun is that probably to an extent, everybody feels that way. But it's just, do we have the nerve to say it? Because
Hmm.
what is it to be me? To be me is to sit in the hot tub under the stars and to have conversations that spiral and ebb and flow through my story, your story, their stories, our stories. And really, any moment, me feels different, right? So to be me and my life's purpose means to be here, so fully present, which is quite difficult, oftentimes, at least for me, to feel the overwhelm of being a human. To be me means to sit one-on-one with clients and dive so deeply into their human design and to help them, to guide them to decondition. To be me means to eat meals sensuously with my fingers that I've cooked to enjoy. To be me means to be a lover, a wife, a sister, a daughter, a friend. There's so many things that it means to be me. And I'm sure anyone who's listening is going, yep, totally feel that. It's ever changing, and it really depends on the situation what quote unquote me even means. And I feel like that is, that is entirely my life's purpose, is really, let me put it this way, to come back to being me.
Mm. I kind of love it when people answer the question with that. And a lot of people do. I would say like, I
Yeah.
don't know, I've never done a calculation, but I would say like half people are like, well,
Oh
it's to
wow.
be my full self. It's and I do think that is our collective purpose on the planet is
Mm,
to remember who we are. And to me, what that means, if I can start diving into the philosophical, is
please.
that we are all embodiments of the divine source,
Mm,
unity consciousness, and we all have a different flavor. It's just like looking at a rainbow or a prism. No matter whichever angle you're looking at it, you see a different color, a different tone. Or if you're playing an instrument, you have a different vibration, and we all have our filter of the divine, but it's a
mm,
singular. And so, our job on this planet, the way I see it, is to fully embody this flavor of the divine as much as humanly possible and as boldly as possible. And it feels like you're doing that so beautifully. And I loved your answer and the details of all the things, all the beautiful things that make up this flavor, this gorgeous Alyssa Troob flavor of the divine.
oh, Sarah, thank you so much. It's so funny to hear you say all of that because I think it is such a process, right? It's such a process of iterations of Alyssa or iterations of Sarah, or coming back to ourselves, or as we're going to dive into today, of deconditioning, really, like who do I think I am versus who I actually am. And of course, all of those have such a spectrum to them, such a spectrum of expression. But when you were like all the modalities, I was laughing because that has been an unraveling for me, is starting off my really progress in the world, my presence in the world, at least through social media, as a dietitian, right? Which is so like as a rock climber and a dietitian, and watching myself really come back to myself and go, you know what, Alyssa, that logical mind, that rationale that says you've got to have this or that or this or that, let go of it and just come back to being Alyssa, whatever that is, and however people perceive that to be, because obviously that's a huge part of it too. You know that as a 3-5, a martyr heretic profile, that fifth line invites projection, right? And so there's always that projection field. And I feel like that's part of the enrichment of coming back to being ourselves, is being able to know ourselves well enough to navigate any circumstance or any projection.
Yeah, you just brought in my human design. I knew that I was a martyr heretic. And I joked before we hit record, like, doesn't being a martyr heretic make me Jesus? And you thought we should open with that.
And I fell in love. I said, yes, it does. It makes you absolutely a fifth line profile, 100%. The fact that you just said that, that is the embodiment of a fifth line profile.
I do not have a Messiah complex, except insofar that we all potentially embody Christ consciousness, and we all are the coming of Christ onto this planet right now. And that takes some heresy to say that.
It does. And at the same time, if you like, I mean, I actually grew up, really immersed in Christian culture. I wouldn't say like in church culture, but in the Bible. My mother had a really strong faith. And when I moved through, like, as a young woman, an eating disorder, that was like, she was like, hey, I'm here for you. And like, here's the Bible. Like, she bought me a Bible, and reading all of Christ's actual teachings, that is what he taught, is like, hey, you are God incarnate. And you are like, I like to think of Jesus as like the divine metaphysician, right? He's like, look, your mind, your emotions, your actions, your heart, all of it impact your experience. And so when you just said that, I was laughing. I'm like, yeah, you are not wrong, in my opinion.
Beautiful. So can you talk to us about what it means to decondition ourselves?
Oh, I love that. Absolutely. So I like to do, actually, if your listeners, if you are sitting somewhere where you have the ability to write, there is a really fun exercise that you can do. And you can really do it on anything, but it shows you how much conditioning impacts you. And you can just take a piece of paper and write, me in the middle, or write, we could do it about sex. We could do it about food. We could do it about relationships. We could do it about money, pick a topic, pick an identity, Alyssa, right? And then coming out from it, let all these branches be had of all of the added value that you add to yourself, right? So like, let's do it on me, Alyssa. So I write Alyssa in the middle, and I go, okay, girl, female, dietitian, wife, woman, worker, entrepreneur, friend, teacher, human design analyst, right? I start adding all of these titles, all of this added value that's been added to me. And you might be like, okay, cool, that's pretty simple. But what's not simple is when you start to unpack all of that added value. What does it mean to be a wife, right? What is the value we add to wife, to dietitian, to entrepreneur? And where does that come from? How have we been influenced to perceive? I think the word wife is a great one, because it's, we're kind of at a turning point around relationships right now, but how have we been conditioned to perceive the word wife? What value do you add to it? Well, most likely that's conditioning. Most of us just put on these kind of costumes of roles, of identities that we've been taught are quote unquote correct, right? Are the right way. And that to me is conditioning. So deconditioning is, in my opinion, really looking at, okay, well, what does it mean to be a wife in my conditioned sense? Oh, it means to behave, to submit, to, be at home, to take care of the house, to be loving, to feed my husband, right? There's all these things that have been conditioned. And then what does it mean to be a wife as I decondition? Well, it means to be a dynamic partner. It means to ask for what I need. It means to be vulnerable. It means to communicate transparently. It means to be one half of an equation that allows me and my partner to do more than we could have we done it alone, potentially, right? So deconditioning is really coming back to the truth of our own experience without all of the added value. It's trusting the legitimacy of my experience, you trusting the legitimacy of your experience, Sarah, you trusting the legitimacy of your experience, and allowing whatever comes up to come up and be fully experienced while being able to see, okay, here's the value that's been added to this experience, and here's how I'm actually experiencing it, which often there's some overlap there. But a lot of the time, if people are really true to themselves, they notice that a lot of what they experience is under the influence of cultural conditioning, be it education, religion, societal structures, rules, regulations, etc. And so stripping that all away and just having your own experience while being aware of it, while being aware of its existence, but not being tethered to its existence, is deconditioning.
Yeah. Wow. And to really develop the awareness to know, to be able to parse out what's conditioning and what's me.
Mm,
I find, I don't know if this is a coping strategy or what, but since I was quite young, I find that I will completely shift gears, move to a new location, change my occupation, um, completely reinvent myself, like periodically throughout my life. And maybe a lot of people do this, but I do it to an extreme extent. And I wonder if that's because like I am trying to decondition myself to like
mm,
strip away every single thing that people perceive about me or that I perceive about myself and put myself in another context and say what remains. You know?
wow. What remains? That question is so potent. That's really cool. I like how you just brought that in, because, even just looking at your human design quickly, your sun, your like what you're here to shine into the world is in the gate 8. And the gate 8 is this individual gate that sits in the throat. It's called the gate of contribution. And it's really like all about someone's style, someone's individual style, the voice of unique self-expression. And so anything that's really individual usually likes to strip away conditioning and likes to be incredibly innovative and incredibly unique. And so, yeah, I wonder if it's actually just part of your process of like a new place equals a new Sarah, you
Yeah,
know?
for sure.
And I think that that's something it's quite bold, and whether it's a coping mechanism or not, if it's working for you still, it's working for you still. That's something that I love about deconditioning, is this kind of lens we can look through for a second. Like, just everybody, if you're not driving, close your eyes for a moment and imagine the hand of God, your hand, the hand of source, just like wiping the slate clean for what you think is correct, right? You might say, oh, if I'm a girl, I need to look this way. If I'm committed, I need to stay in one spot. Okay, cool. Wipe that all clean. And then just ask yourself, okay, what do I want? What do I do? Who am I? And imagine all of a sudden these little bubbles just start popping, like effervescence of possibility of who you can be, and feel how that kind of creates this excitement in your body. Well, that's differentiation, because my little effervescent bubbles are going to be different than Sarah's and different than yours as you're listening. You're going to get excited about something that's completely different than I'm going to get excited about, right? And I'm going to get excited about something that might bore you to death, but that's differentiation. And what I love about what you just brought in, Sarah, is, some people might look at that and kind of, well, you just move every time and that's not consistent and you don't stay, right? But what I love about it is you, in your own experience, trusting the legitimacy of your experience, trust that, hey, that's actually what's the best for me.
Mm.
And as a third line, someone who's here to go through the process of trial and error over and over and over again and really learn the essence of what works and what doesn't work for you, it's probably great to move everywhere. And this is what I love about human design, is it introduces this concept that we are not the same. We are
Mm.
not the same. And because of that, there is no one right way. And so how we really start to go, okay, well, there's no one right way. That means I've got to make some decisions. So what do I do here, Alyssa? Well, you follow your strategy and authority, which of course human design will equip you with, and you do the experiment and you try it on and you take what you like and you leave what you don't like and you play with it and you let yourself decondition, knowing there is no one right way. There is only a potential, or many potentials, I should say, that I, Alyssa, or you, Sarah, or listener, you, are here to express.
Wow. So eloquent. I mean, I love how you expressed all that. I love how you characterized me. Thank you so much. For those listeners who aren't super familiar, I've talked with a few people who have discussed human design. I really like how you're talking about it. It's really fascinating to me. in terms of deconditioning.
Mm.
But for those people that like associate human design with just another one of those things that labels us, how do
Yes.
you like, or that, you know, it's another form of conditioning. How do you parse out human design or, you know, any other modality for that matter? But this particular one, since this is the one that you are talking with, speaking about now, how do you separate that out from other kinds of conditioning?
Oh, that's such a good question. I love it. You're like, let me hit you with a little dose of your own medicine here. Truly, I love it. I appreciate it. It's funny that you said that. The first thing I say on every single person's human design reading that I give is I know that there is a tendency to want to be told who you are, want to be told what to do, or to kind of latch onto an identity. But what I like to perceive human design as is exactly what Ra Uru Hu, the human who transmitted the system, spoke of it as, which is one, a tool, right? Just like your phone is a tool. Social media is a tool. If you overuse social media, it's going to make you sick. We've all experienced days where we go on Instagram, we see too many things, we're overloaded, and we're like, ah, right? Just like we've all experienced over-identifying with something that wasn't really great for us. Well, same thing with human design. It's a tool to use specifically for, in my opinion, objective perspective. It's a tool to help us get a little bit more objective. It's a tool to also help us go, okay, where are my signposts? As I go on this journey, where are my signposts? Where are my markers, right? We don't want to necessarily over-identify with what's in the body graph, but if we come at it really experientially and experimentally, then what we can start to do is almost play ping pong, right? We can kind of go, Alyssa has this tendency to, let's say, overdo it, right? She does too much sometimes. And okay, you know, she could accept that, but it doesn't make her body feel really great. So she's going to look at her body graph and see where she can almost play ping pong with that. Hey, where do I overdo it? Oh, Alyssa's a projector. She has an open sacral. Open sacral people don't know when enough is enough. Or if they do, sometimes they override it. Okay, can I use that in my body graph, that piece of information, as almost a little pin drop or an objective perspective, a signpost, a marker that says, hey, Liz, maybe you're overdoing it, and maybe that's why you're not feeling so hot. That would be how I would use, and how I do use human design, is to say to people, look, this is not something you need to memorize. You're not trying to be your body graph, right? So you're not, Sarah, you're not trying to be this like, oh, I have to have my personality be the gate of contribution. I've really got to contribute. And I, you know, feel really grounded when I use my power skills, right? You're not walking around the world creating nuance in your body graph and then trying to be that. If you are, that I would say is a really great example of conditioning. That's just homogenizing you, right? Like, to your point. But if you kind of gain this knowledge of your body graph, or you don't even, and you just follow your strategy and authority, not with belief, not with like blind belief, but with this kind of open-minded curiosity. If you're a generator type, which 70% of you listening have a defined sacral, you know, what happens when I actually only say yes when it's a yes, as opposed to saying yes when it's a no, right? Really using the body graph or using human design as signposts and markers to help us to kind of play ping pong with ourselves. Where can I grow? Where am I overriding? Where am I not listening to my body? Where am I overthinking things? And using our body graph just as signposts and markers, as opposed to as like a story that we feel like we need to embody here forcefully almost.
Yeah, I feel like that can be said for a lot of like divinatory tools as well, like tarot, for instance. I love tarot, and I don't necessarily look at it and say, this is exactly what's going to happen, and this is all, you know, to me, I'm creating my reality. Something, I'm drawing those cards, something is reflecting back about what I want to say to myself. And it's just a new way of looking at things. It gives me a perspective shift. It's nothing to hang my hat on. It's something to give me a new perspective. And I think that's sort of like what you're saying with regards to human design, is it's like, this is you reflecting yourself back at you. Take it or leave it. Take what you want and leave the rest, and see that there's a possible perspective shift that could be extremely, you know, groundbreaking for you, could shift you into a more embodied version of yourself.
So well said. So well said. And that's where, if we like, as we're all learning and realizing everything is energy, right? So it's like, if you took this body graph and you almost think of it as like a thumbprint of your energy, hey, I can identify Alyssa with this fingerprint, right? Anyone can find me with my fingerprint. It's unique to me. Well, that's kind of how the body graph is, but you don't walk around being like, oh, I am my thumbprint, right? You're not like, oh, here I am. Look at these lines. Mine go like this. No, instead, you're kind of using it as a form of like, all right, well, that's a little bit of identification there. I can orient myself using it. And that's the same with the body graph. It's not something that we need to identify with, but it can give us a lot of entry points into places that we're really susceptible to conditioning, or places where, a huge part of human design is the understanding that everything exists on a binary, right? That black implies white and yes implies no, and this implies that, and so on and so forth. And so really, in a way, it's a tool to cultivate this kind of grace and compassion where, like I spoke to you about your son, Sarah, it's sitting in the gate 8. It's a major player in your chart. It's called holding together, or the gate of contribution. In its kind of low octave, let's say shadow state, it's mediocrity. It's like, oh, well, in its highest expression, it's style and exquisiteness and this unique voice. So do we want to demonize the shadow state or the low octave expression? No, you've probably had to have moments in your life where you feel mediocre, or you feel like, oh, I'm kind of stuck and frustrated here. And it's a cue, it's a signpost that goes, Sarah, you don't like this feeling. Be exquisite in your style, go, you got it. It's like it all exists in one, and there's so many potentials in between.
I do like being exquisite in my style.
I can tell that already.
Yeah, and you brought we before we hit record, we were talking a little bit about my son, because I mentioned that I was a single mom, and I was talking about my kiddo and how I've mostly unschooled him up until this point. He's 7 now. And that's how you brought in the word deconditioning into this conversation, was just like, oh, wow, it's a really good example of deconditioning. Yeah, so I don't know where the question is there, but like, where did that come from? Like when you're talking about sort of like kids, and you also mentioned something about how human design really is for us to parent our children. How do you weave that in?
Oh, such a good question. Okay, so I'm going to start with the kind of a personal antidote first, and then let's work into that really beautiful kind of statement and question. I will never forget when the moment I understood what conditioning was. And it was in the car with my family on the way home from a Vermont trip. And my dad was reading us this health book. He picked it up, used it like a store. And it was about like pharmaceutical lobbying. He had never done something about this before. But the book, as I listened to it, I all of a sudden cued into how much we're so conditioned to perceive our bodies and our health and food and pharmaceuticals and all this stuff. And he put the book down, and we had a conversation about conditioning, although we didn't use those exact words. But, oh, we're so conditioned to think you can just fix things with a pill. We're conditioned to think this, we're conditioned to think that. Really, that moment, I think I was in high school, I started to be like, whoa, what is mine and what is not mine, right? As a high schooler, you're still young, but you're not as young as a really young child. And I remember in that moment thinking, I wonder how different people's upbringing imprints on them, how it conditions them, how it sets these little ideas or beliefs or practices or normalities or proclivities into motion, and then allows them to unfold through their life cycle. And I remember that moment so clearly. And then when I found human design and I really began to study it, Ra, the human who transmitted the system, he spoke about how it's really hard to decondition as adults. And I was seeing that all the time, right? I still see it, but I was seeing it especially like 7-8 years ago in private practice, where you ask someone to change their food, how they're eating, right? I'm trained traditionally as a dietitian, and it's really hard for them to do that because they're so conditioned to eat how they eat, be how they be in their habits. And so this is where, what really struck me is, oh, if you never condition a child to be a certain way, right? If you don't put them through the same kind of education as everybody else, the same kind of eating patterns as everybody else, if you really allow them to kind of bloom into who they are while being guided by a more mature hand or mind or heart or all of the above, what would children be like? How would we eat? How would we move? How would we love? How would we communicate? How would we change? How would we grow? How would we transform? How would we make money? And so that's really what human design. Go ahead, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I don't want to interrupt what you were going to say.
Okay.
Go for it.
That's really what human design is for, is it looks at how malleable we are as young beings. How from the age, 0 to 7, we are just living in our parental or our guardians' auras. And then right around the age of 7, we begin to kind of have our own blueprint, our own energy. We start to really become who we are or who we're going to be. But most children aren't raised with their differentiated uniqueness or with their essence in mind or with their personality or their design in mind. Most parents, I would imagine, I'm not a parent, but from family readings I always do, most parents are like, hey, how do I get them to fit in? How do I make sure their needs are met? How do I make sure they don't stand out, right? I want to make sure they're learning and doing what they need to do and all of the things. But what if you introduced a tool that allowed you to see your child's fingerprint, their energetic fingerprint, their kind of mechanics, their auric mechanics, their energy? What if you introduce something in so young where you knew, oh yeah, you know what, my child is a pure generator. They have in the body access to a pre-verbal sound. Hey, child. Hey, let's call them Jake. Hey, Jake. Jake's 7. You want a sandwich? And Jake goes, You want some watermelon? Yeah. Can I have watermelon? Okay. Well, all of a sudden, now Jake has an answer. Jake doesn't know why he wants watermelon. His body just said, yeah. Hey, Jake, you want to go to the beach? When can we go, Mom? Jake, do you want to go for a hike in the jungle? Right? So really teaching these young beings how to use their inner authority as they navigate life following their strategy, so that rather than making decisions with their mind, oh, I should have a sandwich. Oh, I should go on the hike. Oh, I should play baseball, whatever. These kids, these humans, these little humans who are so malleable get to learn how to decision make for themselves, which most adult humans at this point don't even know how to do. So it really is this revolutionary system that if we teach to children, the children grow up being their own inner authority. They have their own inner authority, their own presence, their own sense of direction.
Wow. So as you were talking, there were parts where I was like really patting myself on the back and I'm like, yeah, I'm doing it. And then there were parts where I was like, shit.
I love
This
it.
morning, yeah, I said we're having pancakes instead of toast, and he wanted toast. Anyway,
Lucky
yeah,
him. Pancakes
but
are delicious.
I know, but I don't know what he's thinking. Anyway, but where I was patting myself on the back is when I was pregnant, I had this intention that Indy, his name is Indiana, that Indy was a cosmic being who knew everything. He was already source consciousness, already God, already knows everything there is to know about the cosmos. And I'm just here to help him along in this body on this planet with these laws of physics and social norms, you know. Um, and I've really tried to stay true to that, throughout his entire life. And so I've been really nervous to send him to any school because I don't want any sort of domineering authority figure imposing their programming onto him, or even like other kids who've been programmed to impose their programs onto him. And at
Totally.
some point, though, like now that he's 7 and almost 8, I'm like, okay, he's hopefully gotten to a point now where he's kind of set. He's
Yeah.
kind of set in his autonomy. He's set in his sovereignty. He knows who he is. And so any adult that comes at him or any child that comes at him with some programming, he's gonna know what's his and what's not his. And that's my greatest hope.
Wow, that's brilliant. And I mean, I think it's brilliant for you, for Indy, and for everybody listening, because something that I think you just spoke to that's profound, in my opinion, is having a sense of authority over, right? Which is such a normal thing culturally for us to go, oh, my boss has authority over me. My doctor has authority over me. My parents' opinions, even though I'm a grown-ass woman, have authority over me. My, whatever, however it may look. And what you just spoke to with Indy that I think is really brilliant is that you have supported him in being resourced in himself and in his own body feedback. And that's something that I think is invaluable, because the thing with human design and where it can be conditioning and it can be just another thing to slap on a label, but it also doesn't have to be, is human design says to us, hey, listen to your body feedback, right? Which, as a very holistic practitioner, as a dietitian, I think is invaluable. Even if that body feedback is coming from a place of trauma or memory that is less than optimal, it still is body feedback. It's still cueing us into something. Even if that body feedback is uncomfortable, it's still body feedback. Even if that body feedback is joyous and rapturous, it's still body feedback. And what it sounds like you've given Indy the gift of is trusting his body feedback. And I think that's where the value comes in for bringing human design to children is, hey, trust that sacral response, trust your emotional wave, trust what's happening in your body, trust your instinct. It's there for a reason. Is it always correct? Who knows? But is it always going to give you information that is more resonant with your own experience than someone else who doesn't really know your experience trying to tell you what to do? And I think that feeling of, hey, I feel resourced enough to be in any situation, whether you're 8 years old, 7 years old, or you're 48 years old, or you're 78 years old, feeling that sense of inner resource is invaluable.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. There's so many other, I feel like, ways and paths that we could go down. Like when I look at the types of work that you do, it's around nutritional biochemistry, menstrual cycle syncing, astrology, embodiment. You've got so much that we could talk about. So is there anything else that you want to bring to the forefront about sort of the modalities or the work that you do?
Such a great question. I would just say, as you say that, it's funny because I'm laughing because I'm going, oh my gosh, that is a lot of things. But it's also not, because they're all so interconnected, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're all so interconnected. And that's how they blossomed and bloomed. Because starting as, like I said, traditionally, classically trained as a dietitian, you go in and you sit with someone and you have a conversation about food. Like, let's say I'm having a conversation with a female-bodied human about food. Well, in that conversation, their menstrual cycle is going to come up, their sexuality is going to come up, their connection or their relationship or lack thereof to their physical body, to their sensuality is going to come up. And where I start to bring in human design, which, of course, astrology is one of the modalities that human design is synthesized from, but is that it gives us these kind of soft entry points, as opposed to saying like, hey, do you binge eat, right? I can look at someone's body graph and see the gate 55, for example, emptiness, fullness. Hey, is there a tendency to over restrict or overeat? And it's this kind of soft entry point that doesn't feel so personal to someone, but they might go, oh my gosh, yeah, I left it out of my intake form, but I do have a history of food restriction and binging. And it's then becomes this soft, oh, well, that's why you don't have normal satiety signaling, right? That's why it's hard for you to tell when you're full or hard to tell when you're hungry. And oh, your menstrual cycle isn't regular. Of course it's not, right? Because your body's perceiving feast and famine and you maybe don't have enough body fat. And so it's really this intricate web. And I think that's what everyone, practitioner or not, is starting to see so clearly, is like, you cannot isolate any variable. Nothing happens in a vacuum unless you're in a black hole. And I don't know enough about black holes to talk about those, but those might not even be vacuums anyways, right? So it's like, it's all interconnected. And really that is where I would leave, any comment about like the work or modalities or what I'd bring to the forefront, is just knowing that when I sit down with a human, I'm not seeing them as a body graph, and I'm not seeing them as an eating pattern. I'm seeing them as a human with so many intersecting variables.
A flavor of the divine.
I love that. Yes.
Beautiful. Well, how can people, first off, how do you work with people?
Oh, I love that. There's a couple different ways that I work with people. If you're like, hey, I really just want to dive into my human design, I'll do like one-off human design readings, because coaching is not for everybody, or one-on-one work is not for everybody. But those are these kind of in-depth, they're usually 2 to 2.5 hours of a recording where I go through your entire body graph, macro to micro, the biggest to the most nuanced. And you get that as a download. You listen to it a couple of times, and then we hop on a Zoom call where we have a screen share and we go over it. So that's a really, it's kind of the least amount of touch points. And then other than that, my primary way of working with people is one-on-one coaching, where we go in really deep and we have, like a 2-hour initial consult. You get that same human design reading, we integrate that in, we play with embodiment, we play with repatterning, we look at your human design, we play with food, eating, a lot of mindscape work, a lot of mindscaping around food, because yes, I can give you a meal plan, but ultimately I don't want you to ever have to work with me or a dietitian again, right? I want you to be able to have the mindscape that supports any kind of movement. So once you start kind of integrating the resources, then we have follow-ups, and I move through with people. Really, usually it's over about 3 to 10 months. I'm like a huge fan of integration time. I do not like to push things fast. So that's primarily it. And then right now I'm also holding a container that's called erotic integration, that really brings in the concept of eros and the concept of the erotic as an everyday energy that we are all animated by. But it's been so adulterated, again, by conditioning, where many of us are afraid to even touch the erotic or touch our sexual self or touch, the relationship we hold with sexuality. And that's something that I see the most resistance around and have forever. And so I'm like, all right, my practice with that is so fun and deep. And so it's time to, also bring that to the forefront as an option for people.
Beautiful. And we could again go down a whole long conversational, beautiful, luxurious rabbit hole about the erotic and
Yes.
sexuality and what that is.
Mm,
It's just like we are all remembering who we are. I think we're all also remembering what is sensuality and what is sexuality and what is the
yes.
energy of that, because it's miraculous and it's divine. And it's very much like why we're here. It's harmonizing duality.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's harmonizing duality. It's so true. And that, I think, is where, we hear so much and have about like the masculine and the feminine, right? And yes, they're both energetic archetypes and they're both really important to understand. But as soon as you tie Eros in, it's like, okay, then you go back to that spectrum, right? Where masculine and feminine, it's like they're actually part of the same circle. And same with dark and light, and same with this or that, and right or wrong, or however you might find the binary, really, then and now. Me now, me then. What ties it together? The erotic, in my opinion, the erotic, the same energy that allowed you to birth and create your beautiful son, and the same energy that brought us here today. It's like, it's the energy that really truly animates everything.
Mm, thank you so much. How can people find you, beautiful Alyssa?
Thank you. They can find me at alyssatroob.com, and that's Troob is Troob as in boy. So at alyssatroob.com, or on Instagram at Alyssa_Troob. And then my email is magic@alyssatroob.com. So really any of those places, those are my like usual kind of quote unquote hangout spots, is my email, Instagram, or my website. And then I also do a podcast it's called the Portal app. And it is, the headliner for it is Under the Influence. And that's a transit podcast that we talk about, the kind of like weekly transits. Usually I do them bi-weekly.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you being on the show. This is such a rich conversation, and I feel like we could go on and on and on.
Yes.
Um,
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, y'all, for listening, and may you have a beautiful and blessed and heretical and erotic day.
I love it. Cheers.